Hey there, you curious mind, and welcome back to another deep dive.
Great to be diving in again.
If you're looking for those big ideas, those insights that help us see things a bit differently, maybe even find a path towards a brighter future, you're in the right place.
That's definitely the goal today.
Yeah, today we're tackling this really fascinating concept called Práña Dharma, what the sources call the sine qua non of human existence. Sounds pretty fundamental.
It really does, and we're drawing on some academic notes that explore this idea, especially looking at its journey through Indian history.
Okay.
So our mission, if you like, is to unpack what Práña Dharma really means, according to these sources, and then explore its potential. How understanding it might offer a positive, forward-looking perspective for all of us.
Think of it as a boost of insight and maybe some optimism.
Exactly. A fast track to a really compelling idea.
All right, Práña Dharma, let's break it down. What's the core idea here?
Well, the basic thought presented is that, look, underneath all our surface differences, cultures, nationalities, all that, humans actually share a pretty similar basic character, a fundamental mentality. It's like an innate potential we all carry.
Okay, that's interesting. So if we all start with this kind of core similarity, where do all the amazing variations come from? How we think, how we act.
Right. Well, that's where our environment really steps in. The sources explain that these differences, these unique tendencies, they get shaped by things like geography.
Okay.
Our specific histories, the cultures we're immersed in. These are the forces that kind of sculpt that raw human potential.
So they mold us into different national characteristics, different worldviews.
Precisely. Think of Práña Dharma maybe as the seed, right? And the world around us, history, culture, environment, that's the soil, the weather, everything that makes it grow into a unique plant.
I like that analogy. So someone growing up in, say, Italy has the same basic human drives as someone in Japan, but their Italianness or Japaneseness that comes from these external shapers.
Exactly right. And this leads into what the sources call the Práña Dharma of individual life.
Okay, what's that?
They describe it as a kind of internal discipline. It happens in our minds, our emotions, the psychic sphere.
Inner discipline.
Yeah, but it's not something automatic. It's something developed. It comes from proper education and being part of a healthy, integrated society.
So education isn't just about facts and figures then. It's also about building this internal resilience, discipline.
Yes, absolutely. It's about cultivating that inner world. And the sources give some interesting examples of how national characteristics can reflect this.
Like what?
They contrast places like Italy, France, England, America with the East, particularly India. They suggest there are, pretty considerable differences in how people process thoughts and even in their outward behavior.
Okay, it's getting really good. So let's talk about ancient India. The sources say they really zeroed in on this Práña Dharma, right?
They definitely suggest it was a major focus. Ancient Indian education, as they describe it, was heavily centered on nurturing, virtuous, disciplined, even holy lives, right, from a young age, like 5 years old up to 25.
Wow, that young.
Yeah. And it wasn't just about learning practical skills or knowledge. There was a huge emphasis on spiritual training woven right through it.
Spiritual training alongside everything else. What did that look like in practice?
Well, the sources describe a society where people, even after having families and jobs, would reach a certain point and consciously shift their focus more towards spiritual knowledge, towards a simpler way of life. It was built into the life path, you could say.
So it was just expected, normal.
It seems so. There's even this example they give about people praying to the goddess Kali to, stop thieves.
Yeah.
It shows how spiritual beliefs were tied into everyday life, very practically.
That paints a very different picture of education's purpose than we often think about today.
Yeah.
Sounds like character building was the main goal.
Exactly. The whole system aimed to develop a character that was reverential, humble, noble. It wasn't just about being smart. It was about being a good, well-rounded person, aligning your inner self with higher principles.
Okay, so if Práña Dharma was so central in ancient India, what happened? The sources talk about challenges, particularly from the Mughal and British periods.
Yeah, this is where things start to shift, according to the texts. During the Mughal era, the impact was more indirect.
How so?
The sources argue that the political instability, the constant conflict, it basically diverted everyone's attention. People were focused on surviving, on power struggles, not so much on that inner social and spiritual development.
That makes sense. Hard to focus on inner growth when there's chaos outside.
Right. It kind of shows how external stability can be, pretty important for nurturing those deeper societal values. You need that space.
And then came the British. The sources suggest their impact was much more deliberate.
Absolutely. Very direct.
Yeah.
The British, aiming for colonial control, went straight for the Práña Dharma, their strategy, to cultivate a class of local supporters by encouraging the adoption of European customs, European education, European tastes, creating a kind of cultural alignment to buttress their political power. It's a tactic we've seen elsewhere, of course.
Right. Shaping minds and values, not just ruling by force.
Precisely. The British education system they set up, as described in our sources, seems intentionally designed to kind of dilute those distinct Indian national characteristics.
To promote a Western way of thinking instead.
Exactly. And the inevitable result was a neglect of the moral, the spiritual, the social qualities that had been traditionally emphasized in India. Education becomes a tool, you see.
A tool for cultural change, yeah.
Yeah.
And this created a strange situation for the educated Indians, didn't it? The sources mentioned the Indian civil service.
Yes. So you have this educated class working for the British administration. But here's the thing. Even with their Western education, they often remain kind of disconnected from the main currents of Indian society.
And ironically,
they were often still looked down upon by the British themselves. Seen as inferior despite the education, it just really highlights the core imperialistic goal, doesn't it?
it definitely underscores that colonial power dynamic. Creating divisions.
It's a classic approach, really. Undermine the local culture to cement your own dominance. And the sources even bring up China as another example.
Oh, yeah. How did that work there, according to the texts?
Well, they mention the British using the opium trade and later apparently supporting communism.
To disrupt their Práña Dharma.
That's the argument presented. The goal, as portrayed, was to foster a population that was maybe simple, peace-loving, maybe even industrious in some ways, but also, well, indolent or easily led, ultimately eroding their original values.
Wow. So, again, weakening the core character of a society.
It's a recurring theme, whether it's deliberate or just a side effect of instability or exploitation. Which brings us to more modern challenges mentioned, capitalism and communism.
Right. How do they fit into this picture of challenging Práña Dharma?
Okay, so the sources argue they both pose problems, but different kinds. With capitalism especially, the kind of exploitative feudalism and then capitalism seen in India, the sheer economic pressure made it incredibly hard for people to focus on Práña Dharma.
Because they were just trying to survive.
Exactly. When you're struggling for basic needs, your focus naturally shifts to material survival. That inner discipline, that spiritual side, it can easily get pushed aside. The pursuit of wealth becomes the main driver.
That sounds depressingly familiar. A struggle many societies face today, balancing economic needs with, well, deeper values.
It really does resonate. And then there's communism. The sources see a direct opposition there too.
Why is that?
Well, the argument is that communism's core philosophy is materialistic. It prioritizes the physical, the material well-being.
Okay.
And it tends to downplay or dismiss the human need for something more than just material satisfaction, spiritual development.
Mm-hmm.
From the viewpoint described here, that's often seen as sort of utopian, maybe even a distraction from material reality.
So the focus is all on material science, technology, fixing the external world.
Pretty much. That's seen as the primary path to improving society. So you have this fundamental clash, right? One view emphasizes inner spiritual growth. The other focuses mainly on outer material progress.
A real difference in what it means to be human and how society should progress.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now, the sources bring in Ananda Marga. What's their take on all this?
Right. Ananda Marga comes in with a perspective that actively wants to reestablish Práña Dharma. And not just in one place, but universally.
Universally.
Wow.
Yeah.
Their philosophy is described as really comprehensive. It includes social ethics, spiritual practices, yes, but also a socioeconomic theory, an education system. It's trying to be a whole package.
A holistic approach, then.
Very much so, aiming for upliftment on all levels, individual and collective. And they also critique some other spiritual paths.
Oh, how so?
Well, the sources mention that Ananda Marga sees philosophies that heavily emphasize detachment from the world, like some interpretations of Vedanta sannyasinism, focusing on the world being an illusion. They see those as not really adequate for tackling real-world problems, poverty, suffering.
Because you can't just ignore the material world.
Exactly. Their argument is you need a balanced approach. You have to address people's material needs and their spiritual needs. You can't just focus on one and let the other slide if you want genuine progress. It's about integration.
That balance seems crucial. So how does education fit into Ananda Marga's plan for bringing back Práña Dharma?
Education is absolutely central for them. The sources criticize the Western system implemented in India, arguing it basically failed to cultivate those essential human qualities we talked about: virtue, discipline, that sense of the sacred.
Right.
So Ananda Marga pushes for major reforms. They want an education system grounded in the national Praja Dharma of each country.
Tailored to each culture.
Yes, but also incorporating their own universal principles for holistic development. It's about nurturing the whole person, mind, body, spirit.
So it's not about just reviving some ancient system, but taking that core idea of the Praja Dharma and building a modern education around it, one that fosters those positive qualities.
That's exactly the idea, taking the essence and applying it now. And the sources even suggest that all countries could benefit from this.
Really? Apply Ananda Marga's philosophy alongside their own national Praja Dharma.
That's the vision presented, using their educational approach as a foundation. And there's this real sense of urgency and possibility in the text, especially with that 1967 date mentioned. Like, this is something important we need to do now.
Okay, let's pull this together then. Looking towards the future, what are the big takeaways here? What's the optimistic angle for us listening?
I think the core message, the really powerful one, is just how important it is to understand and crucially nurture that inherent positive potential within us, within individuals, within societies, this Praja Dharma.
And the challenges.
The historical challenges, colonialism, instability, exploitative systems, they're significant, no doubt. But maybe we can view them less as permanent defeats and more as learning experiences.
Okay, how so?
They highlight just how resilient these fundamental principles are and how relevant they remain. It's like that inherent human goodness, that potential, it can be suppressed or overshadowed, sure, but maybe not truly extinguished.
I like that reframing. Learning experiences.
Yeah.
Okay, so how does this connect to our world right now, the challenges we face?
Well, think about it. Increasing division, climate change, inequality. Maybe, just maybe, a root cause of many of these issues is that we've neglected that inner development, that ethical foundation, that balanced approach to life that Praja Dharma points towards.
So focusing more on cultivating these inner qualities.
Yes, through education, through building societies that actually support both material and spiritual well-being.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the path to a more progressive, more genuinely optimistic future.
It reminds me of that analogy in the outline, like a river that's been dammed up.
Yeah.
The Praja Dharma, its natural flow, its potential for good, it's still there. External things might block it for a time.
But its power, its potential to flow again and create positive change, that remains.
That's a great image.
Absolutely. And the really hopeful vision here is for a future where education genuinely prioritizes holistic development, where our societies create environments where these positive human qualities can actually flourish.
Allowing our collective Praja Dharma to guide us.
Towards something better, a more harmonious, thriving future for everyone. That's the optimistic potential laid out here.
Wow. This has been a really, really insightful deep dive. It certainly makes you think differently about what progress even means.
It really does. Exploring Praja Dharma gives us this powerful lens, doesn't it, for understanding not just ourselves, but how societies evolve, that interplay between our inner lives and the world around us.
So as you, our listener, think about all this, here's something to maybe mull over. What parts of your own inner Praja Dharma, those positive tendencies you feel inside, what parts feel most connected to a progressive, optimistic future?
And maybe more importantly, how can you actively nurture those qualities in your own life? How can you contribute in your own way to building a more positive world?
Keep asking those questions. Keep that curiosity burning bright. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive.